I would call today maybe the first kind of A game day of the unit. In other words, get your brains in gear and be ready to soak this stuff up and ask questions when you need to. Best thing you can do, ask questions about what you don't understand, or to go farther. If you're like, I get it, but what happens if this? That's a great way to keep your brain kind of engaged in a lecture. So quick review, talked about a couple of things yesterday. We talked about how, first of all, ATP is a really important energy molecule in the cell. And it seems a little out of place to talk about that here, but you'll see that it's not. We need to know about ATP to understand photosynthesis. But ATP is really kind of the workhorse, spendable energy molecule in the entire cell. And it gets spent by sticking its third phosphate onto something and becoming ADP, and then it goes back to cell respiration or somewhere else to get the phosphate stuck back on and become charged again. Then we laid out that in the chloroplast, there are basically two places for two different sets of reactions to happen. Light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoids, which are those chlorophyll-containing membranes. And when you stack them up, they're called grana, which is the plural of granum. And then there's the place that's kind of like the cytoplasm of, if this was a bacterial cell, we call that the stroma, and that is where the light-independent reactions happen, the reactions that don't require sunlight. So now we're going to make a big drawing. So if you're like more than halfway down a page, start a new one. You're going to want to make this one big. This is your overview of the two sets of reactions, kind of laid out schematically, meaning it's not a perfect diagram of a chloroplast, but functionally, oh, I forgot about that. Awesome. So it's all about analogies for me in this chapter. Remember talking about the hyperactive kid? So when chlorophyll's electron gets super amped up, like your hyperactive little brother on video games, that happens in the light-dependent reactions, right? You're with me? You remember that? That hyperactive electron has to leave chlorophyll and get carried to the light-independent reactions. Something. So imagine your little sister, your little brother, your cousin you can't stand, in like full-on hyperactive nirvana, like just bouncing off walls. Now imagine there's like a black belt babysitter that can pick that kid up by the scruff of the neck and drop him in like a treadmill with which you could power your house for a week. Yeah? So that babysitter molecule exists in photosynthesis. When that electron gets that excited, the thing that swoops in and picks it up is called NADPH. And that's the other high energy molecule you got to know about to understand this transfer of energy in photosynthesis, the babysitter molecule. NADPH stands for something you don't have to memorize. Don't even worry about it. If you have to know, Iola, it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. Don't waste your brain space. Eli.
Will there be some point in our high school years where we do have to memorize it?
Oh, Mr. Fox might make you know that in AP biology, but I'm not sure. I think mostly he'll accept NADPH. What's going to really suck is when you get to chapter 9, and there's another babysitter molecule called NADH that's different. It goes with cell respiration. And it's a pain to remember that.
And you have to remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's not that hard. The P is for photosynthesis. That's how I always remember. One without the P is cell respiration. One with the P is. We're not there yet. NADPH carries excited electrons. Actually, without the electron, it's called NADP+. And when it gets the electron, it's called NADPH. It's a lot like ATP in that it has sort of a charged and an uncharged state. Something that might be confusing you is why gaining an electron would change NADP plus to NADPH. Anyone think of why that would be? Electrons are negative, right? So the thing is positive, and then it picks up an electron. Why shouldn't you just take the plus sign off? Why are you adding an H? What's hydrogen? No, hydrogen's part of water. You need oxygen too, though. But hydrogen by itself, periodic table-wise, where's it at? Meaning its atomic number is, meaning it has one. What does that atomic number really mean? Doesn't mean electrons. Doesn't mean neutrons. It means protons. That's the thing that can't change, or else it's not hydrogen, right? So hydrogen has one proton. If it's uncharged, what does it also have? One electron. So when you see a positive, in this case, that's just a hydrogen without its electron. Does that make sense? Add the electron, which it does when it picks up chlorophyll's excited one. Now you've got hydrogen. So that's why that's notated the way it is. If that makes sense. That'll come back in cell respiration as well. Anyway, what happens is in photosynthesis, this is one of the two shuttle molecules, shuttling a high energy something, high energy particle in this case, from the light dependent reactions where they get charged up to the light independent reactions where they get used to build glucose. In other words, chloroplast-wise, that means from a thylakoid membrane to the stroma.
So NADPH, the hydrogen is not charged?
No, NADPH, it has the electron. NADP plus, it doesn't. So opposite of what you saw. Now we're ready for the big picture. Now, if you're more than halfway down a page, start a new one. Or if you skipped a bunch of space, you can put this next drawing in there, whatever you want to do. So again, this is a schematic, meaning it's kind of a drawing of the chloroplast, but drawn in such a way that we see processes instead of structures. Don't draw it yet. Wait till you see all the stuff we have to pack in, and then you can start. Okay, so this says from soil and from air. What do you think the two things are going to be in these two spots? Yeah.
Water and CO2.
Water, which one? Water from soil, good. And CO2 from air? Absolutely, yeah. So what goes on here, and this is again the overview, we'll go into more detail tomorrow. Light hits chlorophyll in the ground, in the thylakoid membrane, and excites it. Water comes in, and the enzymes in the light-dependent reaction actually split water into a bunch of different components. Light-dependent reactions spin, oxygen comes out. That oxygen is a direct result of that water getting split. Ultimately, what's generated from the light-dependent reactions are ATP, that's why we had to know about that, and NADPH. Okay, so one of the things that's happening here is ADP is getting a phosphate shoved onto it, and NADP plus is grabbing an electron, taking both of those high-energy molecules over to the light-independent reactions. In the light-independent reactions, CO2 is sucked in from the atmosphere, broken apart, rearranged, and stuck together into this 6-carbon ring, we call glucose, right? C6H12O6. How many CO2s does it take to make one glucose? It takes 6. You learned that, well, you knew the structure of glucose anyway, but you also learned that from balancing that equation. This is very much a cycle, though, because these ATP and NADPH molecules now have lost their mojo, I guess, and become their low energy forms again, and get sent back to the light-dependent reactions to pick up more stuff, and the cycle goes on. Basically now, what's going on is these reactions are using the sun and the electrons of chlorophyll to store energy in these two molecules. These two molecules are powering these reactions, and glucose is kind of the whole point. Go ahead and draw. Any questions as you kind of get this drawn out? Anything that doesn't make sense?
So light energy powers the thylakoids.
Yeah, light energy excites the electrons in chlorophyll. And yes, that is the ultimate source of the several mechanisms that go on in light-dependent reactions. I'm going to give you a look at the light-dependent reactions. I'm not going to make you draw it today, because it's definitely the more complicated of the processes in this set.
So ATP and NADPH are both power sources?
Yeah, ATP and NADPH are both sort of carriers, energy carriers. You know, like a hot potato, they're carrying something that they're going to drop off that'll power something else. The sort of simple overview. Oh, if you the light independent reactions produce glucose. They do not. No, they produce the ATP and NADPH that then powers the light independent reactions that do produce glucose. Yep. Okay, I'm going to give you a look at the light dependent reactions. This is kind of my cobbled together PowerPoint animation, so bear with me, but this is sort of the best I can do at explaining stepwise what happens in this process. Do not draw this at this point. What I'll probably end up doing is actually copying this slide so that you can step through it yourself, because I think that's probably more useful than you drawing it at this point. But what you are looking at is a thylakoid membrane, okay? So you know that these things are these coin-shaped green membranes, right? So picture that thing, and this is the membrane. This is inside the coin. This is outside the coin. With me so far? The two chlorophyll having places in one of these membranes are called photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. They have two different kinds of chlorophyll in them. Don't memorize those numbers. Mr. Fox will probably make you do that in AP Bio, but I will not. But do memorize that photosystem 2 comes before photosystem 1. That's because photosystem 1 was discovered first. Okay, so we know that water comes in. That was part of our master diagram. Light hits the electrons in chlorophyll. This little red dot is my version of an electron. And so that red dot gets excited. That's my version of an excited electron. Now that electron is going to jump to this, which is called an electron transport chain. We'll leave him there. We'll be back to him. Now, water gets split by an enzyme into oxygen, which of course, remember, oxygen comes out as a gas. But also, remember that hydrogen is just an electron and a proton, but also 2 electrons and 2 protons. The electrons replace the electrons that are getting lost because they're jumping out of chlorophyll. The oxygen, of course, gets given off into the atmosphere, and the protons join a bunch of other protons that are going to be building up inside this space, and we'll come back to that. Now back to that excited electron. That excited electron does this thing where it jumps from protein to protein in the electron transport chain. Each time it jumps, what happens is other protons get pumped to that same place that these protons went, and those protons start to build up big time. Because electrons are constantly getting sent down this chain and water is constantly getting split, what you're winding up with is a huge buildup of positive hydrogen ions or protons. Back up. Why is this H plus when I'm saying protons? And what is hydrogen without its electron? Just a proton. Told you it would come back. Here it is. These are protons. In biology, typically, this is how we write proton, H plus. Okay, H plus is a hydrogen without its electron, which is a proton. So this is a buildup of positive protons, which is creating enormous pressure for those protons to leave the thylakoid. Now, let's see. Where's the end here? More protons. Now, that electron gets to the end of the chain. It's exhausted. It is no longer excited. It's burned off all the energy it got from the sun here. This is where it gets re-energized by the sun. Okay, the sun comes in, excites that electron again. That electron gets passed off, and here's where NADP plus swoops in, grabs that electron that's been newly re-excited, and becomes NADPH. We now have one of our two high energy molecules. Questions so far? We're about to do the ATP part.
The buildup of protons come from where?
The buildup of protons comes from two things. One, splitting water, but two, and maybe more importantly, every time an electron jumps down this chain, it's engineered so that protons get shoved into the thylakoid. And that might be the most important part of this process right now for you to know, because it's going to come back with a vengeance in cell respiration. You are basically built in your mitochondria to do this like crazy and make tons of ATP. So the mechanism that the chloroplast makes ATP in the light-dependent reactions is the same as the way you do it. So this is important. This setup, this pressure of protons on this side is what the plant is going to use to make the ATP. And the way that works, you ever seen an old mill built on a stream or a river with a big water wheel? You know what I'm talking about? And you know how that works? That water power, basically the flow of the water turns the wheel, and the energy of the turning wheel is converted into energy to basically turn a stone on top of another stone, and you feed the grain in and it turns into flour. Or more, modernly, you use the energy that's spinning the wheel or pushing the mechanisms in the dam or whatever to create hydroelectricity. So this thing right here is like a cellular water wheel. And instead of water powering it and spinning it, protons do. Now remember the laws of diffusion, right? Stuff wants to go from high to low concentration. Man, those protons really want to go from high to low concentration. Not only are there a ton of them, but they repel each other, right? Like charges repel like charges. So those protons want to get through that thing so bad, and as they do, the force of them coming through spins what's called the ATP synthase in such a way that ADP will get joined to phosphate and create ATP. And now we have our two high energy molecules. Okay, like I said, I'll provide this slide to you tomorrow. I'll provide it probably in print as well. For now, all I'm going to give you, and you only need to worry about the top of this. This is my version of a flashcard, just a giant diagram flashcard where it's got the same thing on both sides with blanks where that diagram has things. Your job is to fill in the blanks on one side only and use it to memorize the parts of the diagram. Does that make sense? Okay, that is your homework today.